Buckle up, everyone, because today we are taking a deep dive into the Byzantine Empire.
Specifically, under early Muslim rule.
Exactly right. We're talking 7th to 9th centuries.
A fascinating period.
It really is a period that
Yeah.
often gets painted as just like a clash of civilizations.
Mm,
But we're going to find out it's way more complex than that.
it's a lot more nuanced than that.
For sure.
And what's really exciting about this is the source material.
Yeah, tell me about it.
We're working with Hesham Hassan's research paper, Representations of the Religious Other, How Byzantine and Arabic Sources Depicted Churches and Christian Identity Under Muslim Rule, 7th and 9th Centuries CE.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is, but what he does is he brings together Byzantine and Arabic accounts.
Oh, wow. So we're getting both sides of the story.
Exactly, we're getting multiple perspectives, which is so important.
That is fantastic.
Uh-huh.
I'm so ready for this. Where do we even begin?
Let's start with the Byzantine perspective, because after losing Jerusalem,
Right. Huge deal.
it was a seismic event for them, and their sources, they use language like abomination of desolation, spiritual crisis.
Wow, so they're not holding back.
Not at all. They even compare it to the Babylonian captivity.
So they're pulling out the big guns.
Yeah, to really convey the magnitude of this loss.
It must have felt like their whole world was falling apart.
Absolutely. And this fear, it colors how they view the Muslim Arabs who had conquered them.
Yeah, you can imagine that fear leading to some pretty strong reactions.
Definitely, they use terms like Saracens, nomads, barbarians.
Almost like they were trying to dehumanize them.
Yeah, to otherize them.
Wow, it's like they're reaching back into their own history and religious texts to make sense of what was happening.
Exactly. And you see this also in their ideas about Arab life.
Okay, how so?
Well, they often portrayed them as focused on hunting and herding.
Really kind of playing into those stereotypes.
Yeah, and contrasting that with what they saw as their own sophisticated Byzantine culture.
It's a classic case of us versus them thinking. So how did all of this play out when it came to churches?
Churches.
The physical embodiment of Christian identity in this period.
Well, the dominant theme you see in Byzantine sources is desecration.
Oh no.
Yeah, there are stories about Caliph Umar entering a church in, like, ragged clothing.
A big no-no in their eyes.
A sign of disrespect, for sure.
And didn't the Byzantines have strict laws against insulting the church?
They did.
So this must have felt like a direct attack on their faith.
Absolutely, but here's where things get interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Remember those Arabic sources Hassan is using?
Right, bringing in multiple perspectives.
Well, they actually corroborate some of these accounts of churches being targeted,
Really?
but from a different angle.
Okay, so what are they saying?
They describe Christians being captured from churches during raids.
So both sides agree that churches were targets.
Yeah, but for different reasons.
So it wasn't necessarily about religious hatred on the part of the Arabs.
Not necessarily.
More about churches being strategic points.
Right, centers of community potential resistance.
It's all about perspective.
And that's where Hassan's emphasis on symbiosis and osmosis comes in.
Symbiosis and osmosis. Tell me more.
He's urging us to look beyond those moments of conflict.
Yeah, find the common ground.
Exactly, those unexpected areas of overlap and agreement.
Okay, I'm on board with that.
Huh.
Did Muslim rulers always disrespect churches, though?
That's a great question, and actually,
Yeah.
there's fascinating evidence that challenges this simple narrative of oppression.
Really, give me some examples.
Okay, well, we find examples of Muslim rulers respecting churches or even funding their construction.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, like Caliph Muawiyah rebuilt St. Sophia in Edessa after an earthquake.
So they weren't always destroying them.
Not at all.
That's pretty amazing.
And there are cases where mosques were built on land that had been Christian.
Huh. So they were aware of those sensitivities.
It seems so.
And what about that story of the mosque named after a Christian saint?
Masjid Mar Sarjis, named after St. Sergius.
Yeah, that always blows my mind.
It does make you wonder.
Right, was there more cultural exchange than we think?
It's possible.
I mean, and this isn't just speculation, right?
No, archaeological findings are also challenging the narrative of widespread church destruction.
Huh. So maybe there's more continuity than we thought.
It seems that way.
This is all so fascinating.
It is.
It sounds like the story of churches under Muslim rule is way more than just destruction.
Definitely.
There's tolerance, adaptation, even collaboration.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget those fascinating questions Christians were asking about Islamic practices.
Right, like circumcision, dietary laws, polygamy.
Two faiths trying to figure each other out.
In a time of immense change.
For sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground already,
We have
but there's so much more to explore.
so much more.
When we come back, let's dive into those everyday interactions, those moments of cultural exchange, both harmonious and tense,
Sounds good.
that shaped this era. Stay tuned.
See you in a bit. Welcome back to our deep dive. You ready to jump back in?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm fascinated by this whole idea of those everyday interactions between Christians and Muslims, like you were saying.
Yeah, going beyond just the big picture conflicts, you know?
Right, like we were talking about Christians asking all those questions about Islamic practices.
It makes you wonder what it must have been like for them in those early decades of Muslim rule.
Right, like imagine living in a world that had always been Byzantine Christian.
And then suddenly everything changes, the laws, the customs, everything.
It must have been so disorienting.
Absolutely. And you see that reflected in the sources. Like we have Christians asking their leaders about Islamic practices.
Like what kind of things?
Things like circumcision, dietary laws, polygamy.
So they're trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality and how to live their lives.
Exactly. It's like two faiths grappling with each other's norms, trying to find some common ground.
But I'm guessing not everyone was thrilled about this whole cultural exchange thing.
You're right. Some Christian leaders were definitely concerned
About what?
about the potential for their flock to be influenced by these foreign ideas.
Yeah, like what specifically worried them?
Things like interfaith marriages, Christians participating in what they saw as pagan festivities.
It makes sense they were probably anxious about losing their distinct Christian identity.
Definitely.
But did these anxieties always lead to conflict?
Not at all. We also have this great story about John the Patriarch.
What did he do?
He's discussing inheritance laws with an Arab commander.
Wow. So they're not arguing or trying to convert each other?
Nope, they're just trying to figure out practical matters.
That affect both communities.
Exactly. It shows that everyday life sometimes forced them to cooperate.
To just find a way to make things work.
Yeah.
And it's not just practical matters either, right?
No, we also have those theological debates.
Oh, right. Those were pretty intense.
They were. We see Christian thinkers like Cosmas of Mayuma
Yeah.
reworking the Islamic declaration of faith to fit a Christian context.
So they're engaging with each other's beliefs.
Exactly, and there are accounts of Muslims reacting to Christian communion and icon veneration.
So it's not just ignoring each other. It's a real back and forth.
And sometimes even a kind of respectful curiosity.
I love that we've talked about these big historical forces, but what about the human element?
Yeah.
How did personal relationships affect things?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Because we start to see those moments of real symbiosis that Ḥassan talks about.
Give me some examples.
Well, we already mentioned a few Muslim rulers who were influenced by their Christian wives or mothers.
Right, like Uthman ibn Affan and Khalid al-Khazri.
Exactly. Their personal connections really shaped their policies and attitudes.
It's amazing how much influence individuals could have.
It is, and there are even more dramatic examples like the story of Edgelona.
Edgelona, who is she?
She was a Spanish Christian widow who convinced her Muslim husband to build a church.
What a church in Islamic Spain.
Yep, all because of a love story.
That's incredible. It really challenges our expectations.
It shows that love and personal relationships could transcend religious differences.
And it reminds us that religious boundaries weren't always fixed.
People converted, intermarried, found ways to make it work.
It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the story.
It does. And speaking of complexity,
Yeah.
we can't ignore the power of icons.
Oh, yeah. Those were such potent symbols.
They were.
And they seem to have been both fascinating and controversial.
Definitely, icons are a perfect example of how something visually and religiously powerful could spark all sorts of reactions.
Right. It's easy to forget about the Old Testament prohibition against graven images
Right.
that had a big influence on early Islam. So how did they reconcile that with Christian icon veneration?
Well, remember, there wasn't just one Muslim response.
True. Different people had different views.
And remember that story about the Prophet Muhammad's wives
Yeah.
admiring icons in an Abyssinian church?
It's amazing, right?
It suggests that there might have been some initial curiosity or even appreciation before things shifted towards a stricter interpretation.
So when did that happen?
Well, we see it start to shift with Caliph Yazid II.
What did he do?
He issued an edict banning human depictions in both mosques and churches.
Wow, so he's cracking down on icons in both religions.
Exactly, and remember, this is happening at the same time that Byzantium is having its own huge debate about icons.
The iconoclasm controversy.
Yeah, some Christians wanted to ban them entirely.
It's almost like these two worlds are mirroring each other.
It really is. It shows how interconnected everything was, ideas and anxieties crossing borders.
And challenging assumptions.
For sure.
But even within that stricter environment, we see individuals pushing back.
Like who?
Like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, the Christian physician,
Oh, yes, him.
who refused to spit on an icon of Christ.
He was willing to risk everything for his beliefs.
And in the end, his courage earned him the respect of the caliph.
It's such a powerful reminder that individual conviction can make a difference.
I love that it's those unexpected twists and turns that make history so interesting.
They do.
So this caliph, he was impressed by Hunayn's courage.
He was, and you know, the story ends with this almost comical image
What is it?
of the caliph being totally surprised to learn that Christians kiss icons.
Oh, right. He was like, do all Christians do this?
It just goes to show you the vast cultural gap that existed between these two groups.
Like what seems totally natural to one person can be completely baffling to another.
Exactly, and bridging that gap took real effort, especially with something as charged as icons.
It reminds me of that time I went to, okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, that caliph who was totally surprised that Christians kiss icons.
Yeah, it really highlights that cultural divide.
Like you said, what's normal to one group can be baffling to another.
Exactly, and it wasn't just about tolerance, it was about making an effort to understand the other's point of view.
Especially with something as sensitive as icons.
For sure.
It's wild to think that while all of this is going on in the caliphate, Byzantium itself is having its own crisis about icons.
Right, the iconoclasm controversy.
Where some Christians actually wanted to get rid of icons completely.
It's like these two worlds were mirroring each other.
In a strange way, yeah.
It shows how interconnected everything was during this period.
Right, all these ideas and anxieties flowing back and forth.
Challenging assumptions on both sides.
It reminds us that history is never simple.
It's messy.
Full of contradictions and unexpected parallels.
That's what makes it so fascinating.
So we've got these conflicting attitudes towards icons playing out in both the Islamic world and Byzantium.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway here?
I think it shows that the relationship between Muslim Arabs and Christians was much more nuanced than we often think.
Right, it wasn't just black and white.
There were clashes, for sure, but also moments of curiosity, respect, even admiration.
It goes back to what we've been talking about this whole time.
Looking beyond those simplistic narratives.
Right, the clash of civilizations idea.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing the complexities, the gray areas, the surprising connections.
That's what makes history so compelling.
And it's about remembering that history is ultimately about people.
Right? People with their own beliefs and values and relationships.
That don't always fit into neat categories.
And it's those individual stories, those human connections that bring the past to life.
They show us that even in times of upheaval and change,
Yeah.
there's still room for understanding and even beauty.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, there you have it, our deep dive into the Byzantine world under early Muslim rule.
A period that's often misunderstood.
But as we've seen, it's also a period full of surprises.
And complexities.
We've explored the fears and stereotypes, the challenges of coexistence.
The power of personal connections.
We've delved into theological debates, shifting allegiances, and the fascinating world of icons.
And we've seen how Hassan's research challenges us to think differently about this era.
To look for those moments of symbiosis and osmosis.
And those unexpected points of agreement and exchange.
That often get lost in the bigger picture.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you a new perspective on this pivotal moment in history.
And a renewed appreciation for the importance of looking beyond the surface.
To discover the hidden connections that unite us all.
So until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep searching for those moments of connection.
In the vast tapestry of human history.
Thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure.